Hi, and welcome to our video podcast and live stream, The Self-Aware Leader. On today's show, we're going to be talking about social awareness and empathy. And this is the end of 2022. We're in the last few weeks of December. And so we're going to be talking about some things that are timely. And I think you're going to find that the topic itself, though, is one of those timeless ones. And there's a lot of lessons that apply on a pretty broad scale and that I think are going to have longevity. They have a lot of endurance. I'm Ron Oltmans with Lead Skill, and here in a moment I'll be joined by Angela, my co-host. And I'm just going to start off here by I'm going to add Angela here to our conversation. Hi, Angela.
Hello.
So I have to, begin by saying yesterday had quite an experience. I sat in my seat for over 3 hours in the movie theater with my sons watching the latest Avatar movie, Avatar 2, called The Way of Water, James Cameron's epic. So that was something, wasn't it?
It was 3.5 hours.
I don't know. I don't know exactly how long, but I know it's three
At least.
something. It's quite a film, and I guess the connection that I would share for social awareness is, it really did help me to think more about taking the perspective of someone else, and one of my sons, in fact, the one who got me there, because he had been saying, yeah, I want to go see it, Dad, let's go watch it together. And I recall that when the first Avatar came out in 2009, he was really too young to understand or appreciate, what it was all about. I don't even know. I don't think they went with us and saw the first Avatar, honestly. And so this was like a new experience for them. But I
Oh,
remember
they did. I remember they did. Yeah.
he turned to me and he had a couple of good insights. One about the movie or the plot itself, which I won't share because no spoilers here. But the other one that struck me was he said, "Now, Dad, on a moral level, he had that question, and he's 18. But is it right to And his question was really about the group that you're a part of. In this case, it's a science fiction movie. So it was about, should you ever choose someone else, like another race of people over your own? Like, would it ever be right for humans? Like if it ever happened that we met, some other group of people, another race of people on another planet, would ever be right to go against the human side, even if humans are doing things wrong or, immoral things, but isn't it like those aren't really people, and so why would you choose them? And it really kind of raised this question about social awareness of, do we treat others as if they are really full blown human beings who have just as much right to existence as I do?
It's funny that you said that and raised that point because this is totally unrehearsed. Because you chose a different race. I am just as proud of my race as a Chinese as you
That
are.
is true.
You know, yeah, I'm not. I don't think you're not a white supremacist, but you appreciate your upbringing and everything else, and we are completely two different races. You know, very proud of each our own race, right? Yeah, where we come from.
I think it was quite a it was like a eye-opening experience for both of us, because I think, even though we have our own prejudices, our own biases, I think
Mhm.
you and I were able to find common ground,
Yeah.
and negotiate, past those differences, even, the race differences and all that early on. And it took our families longer,
Much
to come
longer.
along. And I think it was surprising to both of them. Like, it was surprising on my family's part. Like, what do you mean? You mean Chinese people actually think they're better? And it was like, what? And then, you know, you feeling like, well, what are these, these people, Americans or white people,
Oh,
I come from this long cultural heritage, and, we have a lot of pride, and we've got a lot of accomplishments and achievements. And yeah, so
yeah. Yeah,
coming to common
lots of
ground.
biases there. A lot of is so I was wondering, is that social awareness? Because there is an awareness of, I remember it's like American, because Singapore was once a British colony, so we tend to lean more toward things British. So when I was dating you, it was like American. It's almost like, is there anything good that could come out of it? That was American boy, Yes, and we have so far we have a 30-year marriage. We'll be celebrating that in next year. So yes, lots of it. And this is not a marriage conversation, which we are happy to talk about in another context, but we're talking about social awareness here. And so,
And Angela and I we're both business partners in Lead Skill, and life partners, as you heard. And we bring some different perspectives to the table, obviously. I mean, besides the man, woman, the differences between how we see the world, also, racial differences, cultural differences. And the question about, social awareness that we're centering in this episode, I'm aware that this is within a bigger context. So on the Self-Aware Leader, we've been talking about some of the tools and also, models, some concepts from this field of emotional intelligence. So let me remind us, we've talked about these, 5 different domains. We have really focused on the first 3, which is self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation. And so social awareness is another of the 5 domains. And when we step across the line, we're moving from the self or the individual sphere into the social context, which is involving other people and learning to tune into them. That's really what social awareness is all about. It's not just self-awareness, being aware of what's going on inside of me and what concerns me, but what concerns other people and how I'm going to relate to them. And so first of all, I have to be aware of them and aware of that there's other stuff going on for other people and other perspectives to consider.
So I have this quote up right here. It's from Steinbeck. I'm an American author today. I make quote graphics, and one of the ones that I pulled up today was from John Steinbeck. I really enjoy Of Mice and Men. I wonder how many people I've looked at all my life and never seen. Quote from John Steinbeck.
I really like that. The thought that comes up immediately for me on this is how many times I have treated people like scenery. Where, it's kind of like people just blend in, they become part of the scenery versus a living, human being, a living, breathing sort of person, just like me, with the same, aspirations, goals, weaknesses, shortcomings, the whole ball of wax. And this is a really great quote that
Let me let me ask you, Ron. So talk to us about social awareness. So when I asked you prior to this conversation, I said, so what is social awareness? And you said it's empathy. So in your head, I know there must be a distinction in our culture and our what's current in our conversation these days is empathy. We see that in schools, we see that in public conversations, everywhere. Empathy, Instagram trends and things like that. So I want to ask you, why you chose social awareness as something that we need to consider first.
So, one, it's part of our total model of emotional intelligence. The 5 domains that I just put up. I mean, that's clearly an important thing, but I mean, it's part of the model because it is a crucial subject for us to consider. I mean, just going back to how we started this, talking about the movie, the original Avatar film by James Cameron, it really kind of brought out those questions of like, the blue people, the Na'vi in the film, are they really, people? And, do they have thoughts or feelings that we should even care about? Or do they simply, are they just an inconvenience? They happen to inhabit a world that humans need because the earth is dying and and want to relocate, and Pandora is a great planet, it's livable, habitable, so let's move there. And the Na'vi, yeah, just get rid of them, don't worry about them. And so the question comes up, first of all, do we even need to bother with this? Do we need to worry about other people? I mean, we can be vaguely aware of them. Steinbeck's quote is good. I wonder how many people that I've looked at all my life and never seen. So, like never seen them. And, we have this expression in the culture today, which is, I see you. I see you, meaning I'm not just treating you like your scenery or like something I've got to kind of factor in, like the wind and the weather, you know, something to tolerate, but it's like, I see you, you're a human being, you're a live person. And, I see unique things about you. I see that you've got your own story, you've got your own life. And so I think that is where, you know, the, the difference, to go back to this question, the difference between awareness and empathy, they're not the same thing. I mean, awareness is I'm aware. And that's a step up, that from being unaware, just like Steinbeck, I walking through life, not even being aware of the people around me, that they are people, but awareness is one thing. Empathy is taking it a step further. And it's like getting into the world and caring enough to, learn about them and to treat them like real people.
Females more have a higher propensity to be more socially aware. What's your take on that?
That, I have to admit, that feels like a setup. uh, the the whole conversation today is kind of like it, talking about gender differences, male, female, and things. It's like the things that you and I grew up with, and we're both in our 50s. The things that we grew up with, where it would have been pretty uncontroversial when we were young to make that statement, like, females are, pretty much, more empathetic compared to
Yes,
males. I don't think you would have got much argument.
exactly. And we have a lot of data to back that up.
And these days people want to fight, and take sides on
Oh,
either
yeah.
side of that conversation, right?
Is it a fight, or is it there's a greater awareness that it's not so, it's more nuanced, it's not so binary?
Correct. I think that's what it is. I don't think that these are encoded so much into our differences. Like females just are more blank. I mean, we've learned that there's a good bit of socialization, that goes into this, meaning that we learn from a very young age, to tune into people or not, to be more caring of other people or not, to like be a little more stoic, or like repress the feelings, and those get impressed upon our children from young. whether they're boys or girls. In again, in from a traditional standpoint, and I know that's not universally true everywhere. So, but the point is that some of these, quote, differences that a lot of people, might have thought it were hardwired before, we're learning, even if there's tendencies, propensities, however you want to call it, there's a lot more that happens as part of our growth, and even, what I said, socialization, or how we are raised, how we, are cultivated, you could say, how we're educated or not educated. I think you were referring to something yesterday that really struck me. One of your friends of many years, but she's elderly, was referring to something that happened like in the 1950, and just left an imprint on her that was deep, deep, deep. And it was, like a horrific, a traumatic event. But it's like that shaped her. I don't think that the people that, that caused this thing to happen, that she was witness of, were intending to educate her in a certain way, but they did. So it's like all the influences that happen to us when we're from young to old are part of this, the whole bigger picture.
Oh, what you brought up just when you said that, I realized that we could be socially influenced in a certain way and not even realize it.
Oh, absolutely. Totally.
We could even make judgments and say, oh, those are the sheepish people. It was the term that I hear, sheeple.
Yeah,
But
that was more popular during the pandemic. Yeah.
yes, not sheepish, sheeple.
People acting like sheep or unthinking was kind of the way that was cast.
When I hear these comments being made, I realize that, wait a minute, aren't you sheeple yourself? Because I could see that. So,
That's the act of self-awareness, by the way. And I'm glad you brought that up, because it's really, critical. I can recall when I was in Asia, and I'm talking about in my early 20s, and, one of the expressions that was shared with me that I hadn't thought about, but they were saying, be careful when you're pointing your finger. Be careful when you're pointing your finger. Why? Because when you point your finger, you know what? You've got 3 or 4 fingers pointing back at you. And if you see my hand, it's like these 3 fingers, they're all pointing back at me. So I may be pointing at someone else with this finger, but it's these others that are like, and I guess, the wisdom in that expression would be, before, we've said it before, don't cast stones, be careful before you throw stones at other people, because you're just as open to have stones cast at you. You are not like, you're not perfect. None of us are perfect. None of us have it all figured out. And we see, wow, this goes way back. This is ancient wisdom. I'm thinking about Jesus gave this, you want to pick the splinter out of your brother's eye, and you don't see the log in your own eye. We tend to be very good at seeing the shortcomings and saying, oh yeah, those people, they're behaving like sheeple, and we don't see how we ourselves are being a sheeple in our own way with our own blinders on.
I have probably many examples and stories
Yeah.
about this
Share
particular,
this quote with us. I like this one. This is
yeah,
a good one.
social awareness. But that's why I want to, instead of sharing all the things that I experienced myself, I want to bring the audience listeners back to this quote by Harper Lee, which I think it's time for me to read, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh, it's a good one.
Yeah, I don't think I read the whole entirety of it, but as a author, I'm like, wow, thank you, Miss Lee, for the work that you did before. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb inside of his skin and walk around in it. Harper Lee. So this person that I was interviewing yesterday about what she saw in the 50s in Louisiana and the horrific things that she finally brought up. This is a friendship I've known for many years. Um, I couldn't continue a conversation when the phone dropped. It was heavy, and we have a friendship long enough where we know that we could give each other space to
Mm.
recover from what I just heard and what she just shared. And I realized how essential it is to train and to educate and expand and deepen this conversation on empathy and social awareness. Wow, isn't this common sense? you know, s- I can hear this already. Isn't this common sense? The fact is, I don't know. What is, I'm not a witty person, but I've heard witty lines. But the thing is, it doesn't, it's not, there's so many things, it's not common sense anymore.
Well, and let's pause for a second and just notice common sense. I mean, if you just pay attention, if you just use some logic, it assumes that there's something shared, that it is common to all of us,
Mm.
and that it's sensible, meaning you don't have to think too hard about it, that it just is evident on the face of it. And if you pause even longer and just realize, hey, wait a minute, you know what? We don't all share the exact same common experience. You and I certainly didn't share the same experience growing up. We grew up in two different cultures, two different places on this earth. And
And
so
two
some of the
different
things
races.
that you
Uh-huh.
took for granted, the things that were common sense for you, were not common sense for me.
Yes, it's not even just a toothpaste issue, you know,
It's not a two what?
toothpaste issue. You know how you
Toothpaste. Yeah, whether the cap goes on or whether you squeeze from the bottom or
no,
the top.
no,
Yeah,
no. Yeah, we're
exactly.
talking big stuff. We're talking about racial differences, cultural differences, continental differences, upbringing differences, how we're educated, the differences of how we're educated. I come from a British model, you come from an American model. You know, it was just huge differences.
They are. They are.
Um,
And what is common sense, what makes a lot of sense in one place is like foolishness somewhere else. And I'm not saying that, oh, therefore, there is no quote absolute truth or there is no objective truth. I'm saying that there is a lot of different situations and there are more um, there are more possibilities and there's more things that you haven't considered than you've ever imagined, than you've ever dreamed. Okay, so that's a big statement, that I'm claiming and put out there. And here's what I mean. Until you know better, until you become aware, it's like the world is kind of limited this way. It's blinders, but you don't even see the blinders. You don't even realize how limited your point of view is until you step out of that frame and you see, oh, wow, there's more here to see, so much more that I wasn't aware of. Just like whenever I went to Asia for the first time as a young man, as a young adult, my first time, was like I was already 20, 21. And so that was my very first exposure to Asia and to Asian people living in their own environment in the Asian world. Because in America, I'd met Asian people, but they weren't living in their own environment context, the culture that nurtured and that where they were in the majority. I was around Asians who had to adapt to the American context as a minority, and it's totally different. And so that like gave me a whole different perspective on things.
Things have accelerated much faster now because people don't have to backpack or be posted overseas to have that kind of awareness that things are different beyond what they were accustomed to. I look at my our children and the network of people they communicate with, and all the more there needs to be an awareness, greater awareness of checking in, being mindful. Where am I? Who am I talking to? What is the context? And how do I communicate?
Yeah.
So we have the circle right now. Talk to me, Ron. Talk to us about the areas for awareness. So you have an awareness, yes, correct. Just like as I have awareness coming to the US, when I lived in the South at first, I thought I knew English. And then I realized I didn't know English like the way the people here in the South speak English and communicate in English. And one of the things that I realized is a blessing, huge, huge blessing, was for a lot of time, long, long time, I just kept quiet. I listened. And I didn't realize that was such a gift because I'm such a blabber. I love to talk, you know. But in listening, I got to really hear what's going on. And that's part of becoming more empathetic. And what I notice is um, the number of social faux pas that I created when I spoke. I had very little social awareness of what's going on. You can come from one culture and think you are, hey, I'm A game. I'm top. I know how to be I am socially aware.
Yeah.
Just look at me, look at my contact list and blah, blah, blah. But put yourself into another place and then where it totally is very different, like the Avatar blue people and then the earthlings that came to their land. It's
Humans.
humans. Humans. It's like totally different.
Yes.
And then you have that whale scene where one of the characters was talking to the whale, and those little point, lines that are given to in the movie where they have higher EQ, and that's something that we all know about animals having more high EQ. Some animals, right? That assertion from scientists. And then you realize, like, wow, this conversation of social awareness, we are just newbies in this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I had kind of the opposite, not opposite. I had my own experience, just like you, when I went to Southeast Asia, again, as a young 20 something, of like listening in on conversations. And it's like, I remember turning to someone and saying, what was that? What language is that person speaking? And they looked at me incredulous, like, English. And I was like, I didn't understand a word they said because the accent was totally different than what I was used to. And the rhythm, the cadence, the speaking. And it was just like, I didn't understand, and it's like, and just like you, when you came to America, it's like, learning a different accent, a different, way of speaking English than what your ears were used to. And so, yeah, you grow and develop an awareness. We even heard this, I think, just in the last week. We had one of our neighbors had a Christmas coffee for the neighborhood. And so we got to meet some of our neighbors that we haven't met. And there was an older couple than us who were talking about they love to watch movies, and especially British, type movies and all sorts of, shows. And the wife was clearly more enthusiastic about it, and the husband kind of went along with it. But and she got into it, and then he was like, yeah, he needed to watch it with subtitles because he said he didn't have an ear for that accent. And I was thinking about, for a British accent, you don't understand what the Brits are saying? Is like, that's it's totally clear to me. But it's like, yeah, some Americans they're not able to hear the English, even though it's the same language. They can't hear it because the accent is not what their ears are used to. So what this diagram points us to, this is part of a bigger series about, there's some things we have control over, but that's the smallest area. Basically, I only have control over myself, my own thoughts and, actions, my decisions. But each circle gets larger to show us that, it's a bigger realm. Like, there's a lot more things I have influence over than what I have control over. I influence things, through and with other people. And then there's a larger circle of things I'm concerned about, but I may not have influence over them. I'm concerned, this week about whether there's supposed to be some big winter storm and cold weather and all that. how is that going to affect our Christmas plans? And, I'm concerned about it. I have no influence over it. I can't influence the weather. I have concern about what's going on in other parts of the world, and I tune into the news, but I don't really have direct influence there. And then there's an even larger circle of things that I'm aware of that I may not be concerned about, but I'm kind of aware that they exist or that it's there. And that's not just things very far and remote from me. That could be, going back to our, Steinbeck quote that you shared. I really like that. This
Can
one
I
about,
ask a question on that, please, Ron? So here's the thing. So most people, I like to talk about the circle that you have
okay,
created.
all
Okay.
right.
So let's,
Okay.
before you go back to the Steinbeck quote here. So I I want to ask a question. And my question is, so whether I'm an employee or an employer, a boss, CEO, or just someone taking a paycheck, I think you're onto something about expanding our mind on the importance of social awareness, on awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Because most people are like, oh, that's above my pay grade. That's the humorous way of saying, like, don't ask me. I'm, you know, or my hours are between, X to Y. I've heard lines like, I'm off contract right now. Don't talk. Basically, don't talk to me.
I'm off the clock. People would
Yeah.
say, I'm off
Mhm.
the clock. I'm not, or,
I
white collar
respect
workers might say, I'm on PTO, or this is my time off. I'm not going to answer emails. I'm not going to plug into what, is being asked.
I respect that because there's boundaries. I mean, I don't want burnout. I do not want to work 24/7. I am not about wanting to have lots of accolades or accomplishments just to, not a vanity thing. Okay. So I would really prefer to just stay in the circle of control. Okay. So what you try to advocate here is that, well, let's look a little bit. Let's expand a little bit about influence and concern and awareness in the workplace. So you're advocating something, yes? And why?
The model that I've got up here itself is not advocating anything.
Okay.
It's more, it's just like, is a map advocating anything? Not necessarily, unless that map is saying the boundaries should be redrawn. Like if America brought out a map of the world and it showed that the whole world is the United States of America, well, that would be advocating something, clearly. And so, but if a map is just trying to show us what the territory is like and what the features are, and we can use it to navigate, that's something else. And so this is a model, and it's to help us kind of navigate this realm of like awareness and tune into things that we sometimes, confuse. We bring it all together, and to see like, okay, yeah, there is a difference between things I can influence and things I'm concerned about, and probably a much larger group of things that I could be aware of without not having to do anything about it, but I can be aware of it. And this kind of takes us back to the mindfulness, conversation about the practice of mindfulness is to expand our fields of awareness. And you don't have to do anything about the things you become mindful of, but to not even be aware of them in the first place means that we are making a choice or a decision to narrow our view, to put on blinders, so to speak. Mindfulness is a way to take off the blinders. Whether or not we choose to embrace what we become aware of, or become concerned about it, or try to influence it or control it, for that matter. When I'm sitting still and practicing mindfulness and I become aware of my breathing, I have a choice right then just to be aware of it, just to pay attention to it, or to actually change it, to slow it down, to deepen, to be more in control of it, right? And in the social realm, as I become aware of these differences, I can, just be aware of them and do nothing about it. I can be tolerant of it, or I can be very judgy about those differences and like, oh yeah, those people, or, I I can take that awareness and apply it a lot of different ways. So there's not advocacy built into the model, but it's to help us sort some of these things out. Let me share this. Social awareness. So we're quite a ways into our show here, but let me just say social awareness, what it is. This is a definition, so to speak. It's the ability to understand the emotional makeup of other people and how your words and actions affect them.
That's good.
Now, it also raises this question again that we put up earlier about, is awareness and empathy the same? I would say no, they're not. This takes us to, I'm thinking about Daniel Goleman, who we've mentioned before, a thought leader in the area of emotional intelligence. And a psychologist named Paul Ekman also. They developed this distinction between types of empathy that I found useful. That there is a cognitive empathy, or maybe a more user-friendly way to refer to it is, thoughts and understanding. Do you understand other people in their situation? Do you even try to understand, or do you have like do you have a grasp of, what's going on? Can you mentally kind of like, get into other people's shoes, right? So this is what Harper Lee's talking about, climbing inside of their skin and walking around in it. Do you have that cognitive empathy where you can kind of imagine it, or you can see it, you can understand it on that level? It's like it's something that you can, in your mind sort of embrace. So Goleman and Ekman talk about cognitive empathy or thoughts. And then another form of empathy would be emotional empathy. Can you feel what other people feel? Or can you get into the felt experience of it? So it's not just enough to like be at arm's length, kind of like, I understand, right? But it's like, I feel it. Ooh, you see someone struggling or having a hard time with something, and it's like, it grabs you too inside, and you feel it with them or for them. That's a different level of empathy. I'd say that's getting closer. That's moving in. If you think about our circles here, awareness is kind of like cognitive empathy, understanding, maybe even concern. But it's like when you start talking about emotional empathy or about that feeling level, you're talking about concern. Like you actually care about the other person enough that you feel it, or you tune into on that level.
When you talk about that, and in the US, it's a conversation about teachers are not paid enough. And for me, from the background I come from, I feel like, well, they pay a fair, good wage. And I've been a public school educator myself. But when I think about the role of a teacher, and one of the tenets I at least I stand by is that you are to be a caring human adult for these kids. That takes a toll on you to have emotional empathy. It's not just transferring content. These days, these kids can just get all kinds of content and show me the kind of different hacks they use to get the answers to the exams we set. So we're constantly strategizing on how to, be better than the cheat sheet, which is exhausting work in itself.
Well, I'm going to pause right there and say yes, but even that, you as a teacher were very much aware, I know, that on the cognitive level, not all kids are equal or the same, and that some kids very quickly can grasp something
Mhm.
even by Googling or looking it up online, and other kids can be staring at it all day long and still not get it until you help them walk through steps to get to a understanding, a cognitive level of like, oh, that's what you mean by an asymptote. It's like, I had no clue. Or, a
Yes.
square root. What is a square root? It's like, what? What? It's like, yes, you can get content, but it doesn't mean you have understanding. And I'd say a great teacher helps all kinds of different learners, all types of different students gain understanding of something, and maybe even go further, gain a genuine caring about something. Like, why should I even care about a square root, and
Yeah.
whether I can, you know, tell you that the square root of 49 is.
I've not been masterful enough to be that kind, but I've been privileged to know a number of professors and teachers who have made me fall in love with things that I never thought I'm capable of falling in love with. And one of
Yeah.
them is Hatch, as you
Yeah.
know, who I'm talking about, who studied under Noam Chomsky.
Yeah.
Emotional empathy is something that is exhausting, and I feel for anyone, whether it's a therapist, a teacher, or a very caring manager. It's that 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 is that those people with emotional empathy get the group going toward a common goal, toward common purposes, objectives. So if you really want results, develop your emotional empathy. And before that happens, you must have social awareness of what's going on. So when you describe social awareness as the ability to understand the emotional makeup of other people and how your words and actions affect others, I have to. When I look at the definition, I was like, yeah, I can see why I created committed social faux pas and probably still do. Not probably still do, but I'm just now is a different that's a different thing altogether now. But I can see wh- where and why I was ineffective in the new place and
That
having to
that's a
learn
great
myself.
learning, though, that kind of like seeing it, that awareness. Now it's like, oh, okay. I wasn't aware before. Now I see it.
Yeah. Now I'm very cognizant of what I say because I realize what I say and do actually affect others
Yeah. Yeah.
because I understand the emotional makeup of the people around me now. So I'm even as a content creator, as a contributor towards society, not wishing to just unplug, but to make a difference in the world and to create a legacy that would be of some use for the next generation or for myself. I realize all the more I need to be socially aware, understanding the emotional makeup of other people. And because words have power and your actions do affect other people,
Yeah.
and to be responsible for that. So I really love this distinction that you brought into the world and the marketplace, Ron. Thank you.
There's a third one, a third type of empathy that Goleman and Ekman shared with us, and I want to briefly point to this. It's an important one too. So cognitive empathy, I understand. Emotional empathy, I feel, I can, I share the same emotions. And then this one, empathic concern, they call it, which is acting with empathy.
Give an
So
example, please. Yes.
so you know I can understand, I could even feel, for you, but then I shrug my shoulders and I go away without doing anything about it. So empathic concern would be acting in line with, you know, that empathetic understanding or empathetic feeling that you have, and doing something that either shows solidarity with the other person, support, you know, actually leaning in to listen, spending extra time with them, you know, speaking up for them, doing something, positive,
In my time,
encouraging.
yes, in
That's
my
empathic concern.
okay, I get it. Because I was looking for an example. If you can pull one up in, in the workplace, that would be great because this is, a conversation for leaders at work. So one thing that I observed that is demonstrated really well is among high school kids. So I taught math, so it's not a subject that people like, oh, just can't wait, to do more math, unless you're in calculus class. Um, I'm maybe then still no, not excited about it, I'm sure. Empathetic concern. I've watched this among high school kids because they have this, the cusp of adulthood and high school drama, gosh, loads of it. And I've watched how these kids will gather together to demonstrate empathetic concern for all the high school drama they're involved in. And it's actually quite moving for me as an adult watching it. Very touching. And of course, I have to snap them out of it and say, hey, it's time to do work. Um, Sometimes it's a touch, sometimes it's an eye to eye contact, sometimes it's just sitting next to one another, sometimes it's texting one another. Actions, listening. One of the things I notice is they listen to one another as they pour all their drama out. And it doesn't matter if it's hours of listening, but they do that. So sometimes when I watch that and I remember those memories and I think to myself, man, can I do that for another human being as an adult with so many things that I need to be concerned about? And I have to confess and say, I don't have that many hours in a day.
So
Any strategies and tips? Because I do want to have empathetic concern, but I don't have hours to listen.
I notice it in myself and I hear it from others too. Any conversation of empathy, pretty soon we get around to the issue of like, I cannot exercise that much empathy. There's a finite limit to how much caring I can summon or how much listening I can do or how long I can sit with other people.
Yes, the
Or
term is called compassion fatigue. Yes, yeah,
and
yeah.
it's a real thing. It's a real thing, meaning that it takes energy. It does take biological energy from us. It takes effort to empathize, to enter into someone else's world, their experience, to care enough to spend time with them. Yeah, no doubt about it. It does. Now, what I'm more concerned about is the automatic excuse that I hear come up from people saying, I can't do that, or I don't
Mhm.
have time to do that, or you can't expect me to do that. That kind of like how quickly, by the way, let me just put myself in this. I'll deal myself into the hand, if you use that expression. I'm in the game too. How quickly I let myself off the hook or say, yeah, I, you know, I'm I can't care that much. I can't, express that much empathy or understanding because, what's the because? I don't have that many hours in a day. I got to get on with my work. There's other things more important basically than this person in front of me or this person that I could be showing empathy to. And my word to leaders would be to just question that and ask yourself, is that true? Are the other things more important than that? Is the business really more important than the people? Is there even a distinction that's worth making? Like, what is the business apart from the people? Take all your people out of it. Do you have a business? Take all your customers off the table. Are you really just wanting their money and you don't really care about them as people? Well, I think a lot of people would say, yeah, I don't really care about them as people. it it may sound cold-hearted, but it's just a financial transaction. And I'm not advocating, again, a particular point of view, but I'm here to raise the question for myself and for other leaders, which is it really true that we don't have time, or that it's not important enough to show some level of human understanding for the person right in front of us, the colleague, the employee, the customer, that is exposing a little slice of humanity, their humanity? We get a look behind the curtains at their feeling, their expression, their frustration, their, whatever they're going through in the moment. Is it really true that we can't afford to show some empathy, or at the very least to increase awareness? Like, wow, there it is again. There's that common humanity. It goes way beyond common sense. It's like we share more in common than I was aware of. Like, they have aspirations just like me. They matter just like I do.
A few things came up for me as you were speaking that. So leaders could talk to you in coaching conversations and work with you on that to process those, thoughts and beliefs, ideas, and where they're coming from. And there's a safe space that you create in those executive coaching conversations. Another way with just another exercise that you give, that you charge, that I've taken on a lot more, is journaling. Not just the morning and the evenings, but any time of the day. A 10-minute just to ask the question and just put the thoughts on paper and journaling, whether it's digital or print. Another one that I thought of in my conversation, in my self-awareness journey with you, is that I learned is to stop in the moment and just become mindful, become more mindful, like you said, of the breath work that you created. Just take a minute, scan the environment, the body, and all the various steps that you mentioned, the framework, and then center myself, and then usually the answer comes. I don't have to read another book. I don't have to call up some whatever expert that's out there. I have the answer within. And that's one of the things I like about the tips and the tools you offer. I can access them myself. And I just practiced it yesterday out of the blue when someone came knocking on the door to ask me to take care of something that I was like, whoa, what? I'm going to a meeting in 5 minutes and I need to deal with this. Okay. And I remember just looking around me and just being mindful, present, and then got it handled.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself,
you brought humanity to that moment versus being transactional.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we're not two human beings. We're just two, we could just as well be two robots. People today talk, customer service is like, you go pick up your goods or your order in some lockbox and no human interaction. It's purely a transaction. Now, there may have been a human being or maybe a robot, but who put the product or the goods into that box, and then you as a human being are taking them out. But the simple act has been reduced down to a transaction. There's no human contact involved.
And like you, and now that I'm thinking, all of a sudden, I'm remembering, I've been in those shoes where I'm not aware, I'm not socially aware. I mean, think about the love letters that we exchanged, oh my gosh, over decades, 3 or more than 3 decades ago, when there was no email. Email was not even common back then. We had to write letters. Man, this really date us so that we have print copies about what we wrote to each other because we cannot remember.
Handwritten letters. Yep.
Handwritten letters. It's like, man. And man, are we that old? I
Yeah,
guess
we
we
are. We are.
All right.
And maybe there's an 80-year-old who's listening to this saying, "Oh, you young whippersnappers, I can."
I know, which is what that 93-year-old gentleman at the Y last year said to me when I was like, "Yo, whippersnapper." I'm like, "I'm old." When he looks at me, I'm like, "Well, you're 93. I guess you can say that I'm a
Yeah, he
whippersnapper
was
still."
40 years old when you were born, so it's like, okay, all right,
I
yeah,
know.
you're right.
Yeah, but so it's okay. That's another conversation. We're at 55. So how would you like to close this?
Okay, so the
Yes.
three different types of empathy that
Yes.
Goleman and Ekman mentioned, I think there's another way to mention to refer to them, and I think you were getting at this a little bit when you were talking about being in school. So I see you, cognitive understanding. I feel you, emotional empathy. I take action for you. That's empathic concern. I actually do something. I act on your behalf or for you, in favor of you. And that brings us to the model about different levels of awareness. Even to bring awareness, social awareness, that kind of thinking level of empathy, that I can even embrace the concept or the understanding that a person might be different from me, or what they're going through in this moment is different from what I'm experiencing in this moment. Like, not everyone is looking at the day upbeat and cheery today. Vice versa, on one of my really bad days, not everyone is having a bad day. And so just because they're not showing a lot of care and concern for me, it's because they're not having a bad day like I am, and they're not tuned into me. All right, I'm not at the center of the universe. I can, okay, that's kind of a cognitive level of understanding and empathy. But as we move the circles inward, like concern and showing like I feel for you, or I'm actually taking action, that's where we get into the realm of influence or even control. Things I have control over is I can act and do something for another person. I can listen to them. I can speak up and have a word in their favor. And you've made me aware of this, that there's times when it's like I could do a great kindness, and it's a very small thing for me, but by simply speaking up, because if that person speaks up, they're not going to be heard. They're going to be shouted down or dismissed or whatever. But if I speak up for them, people will listen to me because of my position or where, my status or whatever, for whatever reason, I have a little more control. I have a more status or whatever, and I can do something and show empathy for the other person in a concrete, tangible way. So I see you, I feel you, I take action for you.
I'm sorry, when you said that, I think like sometimes the kids and young people are braver because
Yeah. Yeah.
adults are only going to speak up and say, "I feel you, I see you, I take action for you," when it places of control. I've learned so many wonderful things from young people, whether it's middle school or high school or even elementary school, where they there's some remarkable human beings where they just go and just, I see you, I feel you, they take action. They're not in positions of control.
Yeah.
It comes
Yeah.
from conscience, it comes from heart.
Yeah, so sometimes it's the young people who have a little more courage or bravery than the old people, adults.
And they're young people too, the millennials, the people who are young at work, the people entering the workforce, the ones who have, new careers, budding careers, and they have so much courage. And my wish and want for them is that they would take whatever they see, they feel, and take action, but to do it responsibly.
So let me come back to this, where I kind of started my thoughts at the beginning. I don't know if I even articulated this on the show, but the question formed in my mind, how does a leader develop more awareness of other people and actually tune into the emotional culture? In our first couple of episodes of The Self-Aware Leader, we talked about how leaders create an emotional culture. And this is where a leader developing greater awareness is able to actually influence the culture. Because if you're not even aware of what's going on around you, this is a very interesting thing. I did a video about 2 years ago. It's on the YouTube channel. It's called Empathy and Leadership. But on that, I referenced this survey by Gallup that they did in 2019. And they said 92% of leaders rate themselves as being pretty high on empathy. And then 50% of employees rated those exact same leaders as high on empathy. Tells you there's a gap. A lot of leaders think that they're more empathetic than the people who are on the receiving end of that empathy would actually give them credit for. And so how does a leader develop more awareness of other people and tune into the emotional culture? I think you gave us a clue early on when you mentioned about your lived experience of coming into this culture. I'm talking about into America from Singapore, from Asia, and how you had to do a lot of listening. And, I'm thinking about our political leaders. They talk about going on a listening tour or kind of like going on a tour to hear people's concerns. But I'm talking about something more than just going through the motions. Like, okay, I'm listening, but it's like really listening, really leaning in, truly trying to understand, not just on a cognitive level, but an emotional level, what people are feeling, what they're experiencing, what the world looks like through their eyes, through their skin. And it takes both greater social awareness as well as empathy, like we've discussed here. Listening is one, practicing mindfulness for yourself is another. But ultimately, you got to get your hands dirty. And by that, I mean, you got to go where the work's being done. So that, we've talked about this before too, but management by walking around means a leader gets up from the safety of their desk or their office, their nest, where they're comfortable, and goes out where the people are, where the workers are, and tries to see and experience what the world is like where they are serving customers, where they are assembling cars, where they are, doing the research and, wrestling with difficult problems and resource constraints and all of that.
I'm watching the time right now, so I
Yeah.
would like to hear more tips from you in future episodes about
Yeah.
how that could be practiced, because these days, how could it be done virtually? Yeah. How do you
Or
walk
even the
around?
questions,
So,
Angela, about different, cultural differences, which we've talked about on an individual level, but it's like, and I lived in China for several years. I lived in Southeast Asia, and I'm aware that there's a conversation too about, oh, yeah, Americans are very good at practicing empathy, but we don't really do that here. And I would say, yes and no. I mean, there's different types of empathy too, like receptive empathy. Like I notice a lot of people, not a lot, but I mean, quite a number of people in Asia actually are much more attentive and observe better. And they are receptive in an empathetic way. Like they tune in and they notice things more than a lot of Western people would, but they aren't necessarily great at expressing it. So the outward expression of empathy. And I think Americans express empathy, and even, it's sometimes caricatured overseas, whether it's in Europe or Asia, Africa, as being like Americans just gush, or but it's also seen as kind of superficial or fake, because it's like, you're expressing all this, but I don't know if you really have it in the heart, or if you really get it. You really know what I'm experiencing and going through here. So there's a difference between receptive and expressive empathy too. Some leaders need to stop and just listen and be more receptive, take more in, and be quiet. Just keep their mouth shut. And more people, like you were referencing, just like our young people give us a great example of courage. More people need to show courage and express empathy. Show some caring. Someone stumbles or, has difficulties, like, offer some help. Come in and give them some support versus just let them kind of flail around there without any support. Yeah, more to discuss, but it's a worthwhile conversation for us to have. And I guess the takeaway, the bottom line for self-aware leaders is we have a lot of work to do to increase our social awareness and our empathy. And we ourselves affect the culture by the example we set. It's we're expecting way too much if we think that the people that we lead are going to be more empathetic than what we're showing them ourselves. That they're going to take better care of customers than what we're doing to take care of our team members. Leaders set the example of empathy, and that's really where this all begins. So thanks for joining us in this conversation. You got any final words, Angela?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
Here on the 8 Skill Conversation. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to have you along. And your insights, you have made me a much more empathetic person, just by having to deal with someone different than me. And man, this just opens up a whole nother thing, which is we don't have time to go into, is how empathy and social awareness feeds back into self-awareness, that we truly cannot gain self-awareness as an individual acting alone. We really need the insights of other people. We need the social dimension to even help us understand ourselves. We need the feedback from other people. And so social awareness, the more you work on that, it also gives us a feedback loop to actually gain self-awareness, because we come to learn and understand more about ourselves as we're engaging with other people. As we increase our empathy, it also builds up our self-awareness. Another link for us to explore in a future episode. Thanks for joining us today. The Self-Aware Leader is brought to you by LeadSkill, and we just really welcome you to join this conversation with us, and check out leadskill.com for more resources, whether our books, materials, and classes, groups that you can join to up your skill level and develop further as a self-aware leader. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next episode.